What is the creepiest thing you've ever done without being caught? Story 1. I am secretly obsessed with my best friend. I am male and she's female, and we're both dating other people. She's never been interested in me. Well, since I am such good friends with her, she's occasionally let me know some of her passwords to emails and stuff, and of course I utilized the heck out of that. Found some risque photos once, but no intimate pictures or anything. Still, I was a creep. But that wasn't good enough for me, so at some point, I started stealing her and her boyfriend's phone at parties when they'd get pretty drunk and pass out. Finally found some pictures and transferred them to my phone and soloed to it furiously. But still, it gets worse. I set up a keylogger on my laptop and let her use it. Eventually got all her passwords and began actively monitoring her emails. Mostly uninteresting. But I found some more very explicit pictures. But one day, I was browsing her email and noticed she'd signed up as a model on a cam site. Well, I started checking her page every night until she finally signed on. I recorded everything I could and even paid her to flash me multiple times anonymously. More furious, diddling. She stopped camming not long after that, and for a while I was bored. So I pretended to be a random stalker and blackmailed her for more pictures, threatening to tell her boyfriend, who was very insecure and didn't know about her camming. She ended up confiding in me about the whole thing, and our friendship was strengthened significantly as I played both the creepy stalker and the comforting best friend. I am a terrible person. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. In college, I hid in my friend's closet when he was on his way back from class so I could scare him when he came in. He arrived with a female, and they immediately ripped off their clothes and started doing the deed. I was too afraid to leave, so I watched them do it 3 separate times over a period of about 2 hours. It was entertaining, but I didn't get much enjoyment out of it because a lot of my view consisted of my friend's a-hole. After she left, I came out of the closet in front of my friend. We had about an hour-long laugh out of it. If she had caught me in there, she would have lost her mind. Story 3. I live with a person of the opposite sex and basically follow her around the house. When she is in the shower or getting ready in the bathroom, I will crack the door a tiny bit and peer through. I have a flip camera that can be set so it has no LED or noise. I can turn it on and leave the room and have no one know it's on. I have filmed entire workouts and Zumba where she is wearing just a sports bra and an inner. I take pictures on my phone all the time. I have a folder on my work computer that has over 200 photos that she is unaware of. Immediately after taking said photos, they are emailed to me and erased from the phone. She would flip out if she ever found out some of the photos I have. Many are intimate or in a bikini. I have soloed off to her while she has been outside sunbathing with no top on, while I was upstairs in a window looking down. I continuously remove her covers while she sleeps and solo one out while staring at her body. Sometimes I even carefully crawl into her bed and make sure that an arm or leg of mine is touching her while I diddle. When I see her out in public and she does not know that I am there, I will keep out of sight and just watch her. I also do this at the house, but she tends to catch me while at the house, but I can play it off as though I am looking for something or just entering the room. It helps that she is not the most observant person and is almost blind without her glasses. Story 4. In high school, my girlfriend invited me over to a house she was babysitting at after the kids went to sleep. We were involved in a serious makeout session on the parents' bed, and only partially clothed when the parents came home early. She ran into the bathroom, and I jumped into the closet, but I realized my pants were still across the room on the other side of the bed. Soon after she came out of the bathroom, I heard them thanking her, and then the father told her he would drive her home because she didn't have a car. She was terrified and didn't know what to do, so she left with him. I found myself semi-clothed in the parents' closet and alone in the house with the mom and the sleeping kids. I was terrified. The closest had the shutter-type doors that allowed for partial visibility, so I could see the mom start to get undressed and prepare for bed. It was starting to look like the beginning of a long night that was sure to end in either me being arrested or shot. When it seemed like all hope was lost, she went into the bathroom and shut the door. Seeing my opportunity, I leapt out of the closet, grabbed my pants and ran out the back door. To this day, I don't know why I went out the back door, but I did. I crawled over a 6-foot-high block wall and landed in the neighbor's yard, still clutching my pants. I had to hop several other walls before I was able to get back to my car and tear out of there like the Dukes of Hazzard. Story 5. My sister was the victim of a particularly nasty date, essay situation with a guy in law school. She couldn't and wouldn't bring herself to report it or do anything about it, but it was a legitimate claim. So, I made it my mission to torment him for years. I didn't involve her because she wouldn't have been cool enough to carry it off or keep it quiet. This began in the 80s, so internet stalking and such weren't available. I was just out of high school and was working in a key shop with engraving and rubber stamp making. I made a rubber stamp of his name and address. I began by ordering him every single Bradford Exchange commemorative plate available. You could mail order many things back then, just with a bill me later option. I subscribed him to every magazine I could find. I saved every single blow-in from newspapers, magazines, and such. I paid the very little cash required to list his house in garage sale, notices in what was then called the Green Sheet, a little community paper. I put in early bird garage notices saying people should go to his side gate and come into his backyard for the garage sale, knock on the patio door, etc. I listed his cars for sale. I sent in his name and address as a sponsor for every single event I could find. I sent letters to the editor with the most unpopular views I could think of and signed his name to them, giving sufficient details to assure there could be no misunderstanding. It was him. Some were published. As technology progressed, I couldn't get away with listing his various houses for rent because I could no longer do so without ID and other forms of proof. The various methods for listing garage sales and such without a paper trail also began to disappear. It took a good 5 to 10 years before I could no longer track his various home addresses and telephone numbers. But, as a member of the bar, he couldn't hide his offices or office phones. They are public records through the state bar. I began to follow up in that manner. I'd simply use his law office instead of his home, because he couldn't keep that unlisted. I'd use his number for all sorts of ads and still complete the blow-ins for magazine subscriptions, and order anything that didn't require prepayment. I tormented this guy for approximately 15 years in this manner. Only when he married fairly late in life, and I saw he now had stepchildren in the home as revealed by a profile on him in a legal journal, did I leave him alone. No need to scare the wife and kids. Plus, in a complete coincidence, I ended up joining the legal profession myself, and at some point, I had to stop with my own moral turpitude. But it was fun whilst it lasted, and I hope I made him wonder for 15 years what rained this chaos down on him. I checked bar and real property records. This individual is now deceased, 18+ months. Story 6. When I was 11 to 15, I would constantly go over to my friend's house to go swimming. First, it was for fun and chillaxing, but one day I just had to use the restroom, and the one downstairs was occupied. So I slowly waddled upstairs to stop myself from exploding pee all over the walls, and I finally made it to the restroom. Now this restroom is used by my best friend, his little brother, and his sister who is 3 years older than me. And they were a bunch, much like my siblings and I, who would undress next to the shower but forget to clean up the clothes, so it forms a pile for the end of the week. Well, I finished peeing when I glanced over at the pile, and noticed a pair of his sister's inner just lying there in all their worn cottony goodness. So I did what any rational hormone-riddled boy would do. I snatched and took a good sniff. While I started soloing off, I noticed a second pair, which looked a little more worn, and proceeded to wrap those around my head and a little inside my mouth. And finally I finished my hard work in the inner and gave them one last whiff before throwing them back in the pile, washing my hands and telling my friend I had stomach problems, which is what took me so long, and I walked home. Rinse and repeat the process every week at least once for 4 years with varying types of inners until she was 18 and moved away to college. Story 7. I like looking into people's houses at night. Just when I am walking my dogs, I don't go out to do it. I like seeing how other people live, I guess. It is winter here for 8 months a year, so I wear my parka with the hood up. It is furry, so I can turn my head and look through the fur. This way it looks as if I am facing forward, even if I am staring right at you. That innocuous-looking girl walking by? She is watching you watching her. She is watching you argue with your wife. She is watching. Story 8. An old female friend of mine had come down to visit, and we ended up staying in a hotel that night. My roomie, who also knew her, showed up unexpectedly, and we all had a great time. A few hours went by, and he was assumed to be passed out drunk on the bed, so we paid him no mind. She and I then proceeded to bang drunk while my bud was passed out on the bed next to us. When we started getting into it, we heard love songs coming off my phone. Turns out he was passed out. He was listening to music on my phone while watching us, then decided that he should set the mood by playing love songs he found on YouTube. The said female friend is also now my girlfriend. Story 9. I had a girlfriend who cheated on me. We separated, though I still loved her dearly and could hardly fathom how I could find happiness ever again. A couple of weeks later, I enlisted in the Marines without consulting anyone, and didn't tell my family until I was already contracted and set to begin training. I expedited the whole process and found myself in boot camp just 3 weeks after speaking with the recruiter. During boot camp, my ex and I wrote a lot of letters, and she sent me pictures. When I finished training, we didn't get back together, much to my dismay. Fast forward 1 year, and I am slated for my first deployment to Iraq. It was a winter deployment that was going to cause me to be absent for my birthday, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and the February holidays. Halloween has always been my favorite, so I decided to host a costume farewell party in early September. I very much hoped to have my ex, whom I still loved at this point, in attendance. She refused to go, except on the condition that the guy she was presently with could accompany her. I conceded. I got absolutely thrashed, and started a confrontation with my ex-date, which I diffused when I recognized my behavior, opting to leave the party temporarily to cool off and smoke some cigs. I didn't get very far before several of my friends caught up and pleaded for me to come back. In my passive-aggressive nature, I got fed up and power-walked back to the party, though I desperately wanted to just be alone for 10 to 15 minutes to meditate on the situation I had brought upon myself. Upon entering the side gate to my backyard, I saw the guy with his back to me, walked up to him and just started beating the crap out of him to the best of my ability, which admittedly was very poor in my incredibly drunken state. I didn't hurt him too much before several of my friends pulled me off. One less than good friend picked me up and threw me like a ragdoll onto the concrete. I was too drunk to really feel it, but screw that guy. I wrestled down onto the back lawn where my dad sat on my chest and talked a lot of crap about how big of a man I must feel like, while my heaviest friend sat on my legs and 2 other friends sat on each arm to pin me down. I was beyond reason. I managed to free my strong arm and punch my best friend's girlfriend in the face as she hovered above my face trying to talk me down. I think I bit a friend as well. The only thing that went through my mind was that I was determined to end this guy and anyone who tried to stop me. Recognizing the predicament I was in, 4 versus 1, I played possum until they all got off me and left me to sleep it off. The whole time, however, I was operating with surprising clarity of mind as I tracked the movements of the party guests and planned my escape. Once I had enough space to get up off my back in my drunken state, I sprang up and vaulted my back fence, landing on my head, springing up again, and sprinting across a main street, which my friends allege nearly caused me to be struck by a car. I don't know, I was mostly oblivious to the world. I could only hear my heart beating and my thoughts, and could only see my set objective. Across the main street was an undeveloped desert plot. A group of friends had given chase. However, they stopped to grab flashlights and left me with a substantial lead. As soon as they got to the desert, I was already about halfway through. I simply dropped to the ground and crawled until they gave up, surprisingly quickly. After they turned back, I was able to crouch walk, keeping just my head above the tumbleweeds. I made it through the desert and into a neighborhood which I Usain bolted through, until I found myself on a street with only porch lights and a solitary street light offering illumination. By this point, my friends and family had formed search parties with vehicles. I avoided their detection by staying in the shadows and hiding underneath parked cars as they passed. Some 30 minutes later, I finally made it to my destination, my ex's neighborhood. I had a feeling she and her date would go back to her place because it was only 1.5 miles away and they both had been drinking. Sure enough, I see them walking on the sidewalk towards me. By this point, I had dropped the splinter cell routine and instead just walked, recharging my energies. They could see me. I am sure of it. So it was too late to hide, and distance-wise I could not reach them before they could reach safety. Moments after spotting me, they flipped their direction and then broke out into a sprint back to her house. I couldn't catch them, so I just continued walking like an 80s horror antagonist. A minute later, I saw a car spinning its tires around the corner and I knew they had fled and I could no longer follow. I stood for a few minutes debating my next move when two police cruisers pulled onto the street and started coming towards me. I was sitting in darkness against a chain-link fence, which had a couple of thick trees just on the other side. I vaulted the fence, and to better paint a picture, this was actually my high school's large athletic field, with no possible way for me to cross it without being clearly visible. I picked the darkest patch of grass, which was shaded from streetlights, and lay down. My costume was a dark green flight suit, so I blended into the healthy grass rather well. The police cruisers drove up and stopped exactly opposite me in the street. I felt that they had to have seen me. They swept the field with their spotlights real quick, and then just sat there. They didn't see me. At that moment, my phone began to ring. BlackBerry Pearl. I mashed the end call button with such force that I am surprised I didn't break it. My phone kept ringing, one after another, and I couldn't even turn it off before it began ringing again. Eventually, I got it to turn off in between calls, but the police were still there. I don't remember the police leaving. I woke up as the first light was illuminating the sky. I felt filthy and damp from sleeping face down in a grass field for 3 to 4 hours. I assessed the situation, vaulted the fence, and started towards my ex's house. Even though I was mostly sober at this point, a little groggy/hungover, I still felt compelled to attempt to carry out my plan, I guess. Or at least beat the crap out of the guy and ruin his ability to get laid in the future. I arrived at my ex's house. I had snuck in and out of her house in the past, and her dogs liked me, so it was very easy to let myself in. I chose the less discreet method of punching the access code into her automatic garage. I closed the garage behind me and headed to her room. The house was empty, thankfully, in hindsight. Like I said, I felt filthy, so I took a shower. I air-dried to avoid leaving any evidence of my intrusion. I dressed in my flight suit and sat on her bed and cried, not sobbing, just a steady flow of tears down my psychopathic and stoic face. I dug out her memory box and read some of the letters I had sent to her in boot camp. After about 30 to 45 minutes, I had had my fill of self-harm and put everything back the way it was, and then headed out the door. I leisurely walked home, facing the rising sun and listening to the voicemail that my family and friends had left me. I entered my home, walked to my mother's room, and woke her to let her know that I was home and safe and that I was going to sleep and not to wake me. This all really happened, and I am not exaggerating a single word of it. I guess the only takeaway or advice I can give is directed towards women. If you cheat on a boy who truly loves you and his reaction is to join the military because he desperately hopes to die in combat, cut all ties. Don't lead him on or engage him in any way, don't try to be friends, and certainly don't push his buttons by manipulating him into situations that you know would make him uncomfortable. There is very little doubt in my mind that if I had got my hands on the two of them, he would have not lived, and she would have been savagely SA'd and ended right there. Story 10. I was walking through a park and got tired near one of the kids' areas. I sat on the nearest bench, facing the playground, and a typical thin, snippy Pilates mom sat down next to me and tried to make small talk even though I looked like a cartoon supervillain. "So which one is yours?" she asks. I stare into the play area and say, "Whichever one gets in my van first." I intended to diffuse the situation through humor and make small talk, but my instincts said to flee, so I did. Story 11. I was supposed to go out with my friend, but there was a deadline on her leaving without me, and I missed it. So when I arrive at her empty home without premeditating or even thinking all that much about it, I decide it would be fun to hop the back gate and go in through the back door. Inside, I just wanted to do something generically creepy, so I picked out a couple of outfits from her closet and laid them on the bed. That's all I moved. I also read a stack of letters I found, which turned out to be a vampire fantasy novel she was writing in letter format. I read them, memorized bits, and then weeks later started calling her, saying I woke up from the strangest dream with the intense urge to speak to her, and then describing bits of her novel as if I dreamed it. Story 12. A group of friends and I thought it was hilarious to be intentionally creepy to this one dude we knew who thought he was way too cool to acknowledge us. We had met him at various metal gigs. He was a big player in the scene. He thought the world of himself and was quite open about his disdain for us mere mortals. Anyway, we would make an effort to go places we knew he'd be and act overly familiar and friendly. Always open our eyes a bit too wide while smiling. Stare at him from across the room, and when he makes eye contact, smile and slowly nod. General creep behavior. The point at which we got carried away was when we snuck into his house when the front door was open, stole the ice cream from the freezer, took pictures of the container and its contents, and then snuck back in to replace it. Then we created a new email address to send the pictures of his ice cream to him, along with your sweet and cool and other complimentary messages. We thought it was funny, and we were doing it to be deliberately weird. He got a bit spooked and posted all over Facebook that he was calling the police and getting the house forensically tested. Well, that obviously never happened. I am still free to roam the streets. No one is too cool to acknowledge us. No one. Story 13. When I was 12, we had a S-offender in our community. He would break into homes and drag teen girls onto the golf course and SA them. We lived close to every house where an abduction took place. I tried to lure him in because I wanted to catch him. I set traps, alarms, name it. The only thing I managed to capture was my cat when the motion alarm went off. I was a strange kid and I thought if I could catch him, nobody else would suffer. My preteen mind wasn't exactly focused. Story 14. Back in high school, there was a really absurdly long storage closet for chairs. Our graduating class was always in charge of putting the stacks of chairs in the closet. It was only recently built, so it had no lights whatsoever, and since it was long, it was dark as heck in the back, so you needed a flashlight to see what you were doing. I was a real slacker, so I put one stack in and snuck my way back into the closet and waited until the closet was full. I hung out there for a good class period or two, taking naps and listening to music. Eventually, this one spazzy kid came into the closet, which by this point had no space due to well over 40 stacks of chairs. I am lying across the stacks in the deepest shadows. To this day, I have no clue why he was in there. But I didn't care. I wanted to laugh, and I wanted to scare him. I dragged my nails quietly up the wall. I could hear him stop breathing. Hello! The fear in his voice meant the game was on. I wait 5 minutes absolutely silently. Then, I couldn't stand it anymore. I let out a blood-curdling scream and thumped my fists against the wall. I hear him scrambling and practically crawling up the door trying to get out. I hear him run down the hallway, and I use that moment to hop from stack to stack and out of the closet, grab my books and join health class, where I watched a video of a lady getting her kneecap cut open and removed. Story 15. I dated this girl who was into a whole wide variety of fantasies, and we used to go at it doing all sorts of crap practically down to the exact minute before her roommates would come home. She had a big food fantasy, and literally straight up asked me to go to her apartment and film myself soloing off into food and leave the food and video laid out for her in the kitchen. That day I soloed off into a bowl of cereal, a thing of yogurt, and a bowl of quinoa. What made me nervous was that I thought I kept hearing footsteps coming to the door, so I'd lose my Woody and have to start from scratch. I didn't want her roommates to walk in on what I was doing. That was a weird day for me. Story 16. I fancied a guy a lot last year, but I would find it impossible to go up and talk to a stranger. I spent some time thinking of how to start up a conversation with said person, and came up with a long way round that my friends said made me exceptionally creepy. I am in a university town, and the guy in question used the same building as I did, and I'd occasionally see him around. The building was only for 6 or 7 subjects, so I narrowed down slowly what he did. I worked out he was in a geography class, and I knew a guy in the same year in class and asked him if he knew his name. My friend didn't know his name exactly, as he was Russian, but he gave me a rough sound of his name. Our university email system allows you to type the person's name into the send field, and all students and lecturers whose names start with the letters you have typed in show up. I know my linguistics and worked out the variants of the possible starting letters that I was given and eventually found one name that seemed to be the name my friend had heard. Facebook allowed me to find the guy, and so I had a starting point. I stalked him a bit more and found out who his friends were. Here's where I got extra sneaky/creepy. We have one of the best students' unions in the country, and I knew I would see him and his mates there at least semi-frequently. One drunk night when I had a lot of courage, I happened to be walking past a female friend of his, Rachel, who had never met me. On a mad whim, I turned to her as I walked past and said, "Hi Rachel, how are you?" And she turned and automatically smiled and greeted me. But I could see on her face she was thinking, "Who the heck is this?" She played it cool and asked my name since she had forgotten it, as she must have been drunk the last time we met. It was a good guess on her part, as I had been going for that lie. I said my name and said, "Yeah, you were quite drunk at that party over in insert part of the city I knew they lived in." I said I had to rush on, and I'd see her round. I had now laid the first stone of the foundation. A few minor things happened, but then one night under similar circumstances, I found myself again drunk at the Union and knew the gorgeous Russian guy was there. I waited for ages, as nervous as I had ever been, but eventually saw a Russian and a chum go up for drinks at the bar. Here's the genius part. I walked up behind them at the queue for the bar and ignored the hot guy. I turned to the other guy and said, "Mark, I haven't seen you since that uni-wide event where everyone got wasted." He did what Rachel had done and played along politely. I talked for a few minutes more until we eventually were right at the front of the queue, and I suddenly insisted that I was buying him a drink. Poor Mark. Nice guy, trying to deal with a drunk stranger, he didn't want to take advantage of me and refused to let me pay. I of course wasn't letting that happen, and insisted. At this point, with wide-eyed naivety, I asked, "Are you with anyone else?" At which point he said, "Yeah, here meet Russian," and suddenly I was shaking hands with Russian and exploding on the inside. He didn't know me, nor did I pretend to know him, but here I was, a fun and clearly generous guy, buying him a pint for no reason. Obviously it was a good first impression. After I got the drinks, I said I didn't know where my friends were and should probably look for them, but having just paid for their drinks, they insisted I join them for the pint. We went back to their table, where Rachel was, again very friendly, but a tad confused as to how she knew me, and I spent the rest of the night talking to him and his friends. And that is how I creepily got to know the Russian guy I fancied. I did not bang him, he turned out to be straight. I did think to find out his orientation, but there was no concrete evidence, and lots of little hints. My drive meant that I ignored the little pro-straight bits and gathered the acorns of he's gay into a mighty feast, a feast that turned to ash in my mouth. How do I talk to people if I can't talk to strangers? Well, I hate the bit where you walk up to a stranger and have nothing to say. It's also kind of obvious that you're only going to talk to a stranger if you fancy them, and as funny as it is, I wasn't really out of the closet at that point. This year-long incident was what brought me out. One denying friend, hilariously around the time the story happened, asked, "Dan, why are you always talking about Russians? You're straight." To which no one in the room said anything, as it was kind of obvious that months of this behavior weren't so I could make a friend. Anyway, I was able to talk to them, as in my charade, I wasn't talking to a stranger but a friend, and so I skipped straight past the awkward intro stuff and into a normal conversation. Story 17. My roommates and I had a party in which a girl I had been spherical on for years showed up with her past. The party ended, and they spent the night in our living room. Fast forward to around 2 a.m. I get up to go to the bathroom, and just as I pass the living room, I realize they're doing it about 3 feet away from me, not even stopping. So I do my business and head back to my room. I proceed to get unclothed, lie down on the floor, press my ear to the ground, and listen to them do it in an effort to fulfill my pathetic dreams of sleeping with this girl. Story 18. I had a crush on my professor, so I did a few hours of sleuthing, found her online handles, and read through her entire live journal, tracked her movement on Foursquare and mapped my run, read her tweets, hoping one day it would mention her students, me in particular, photoshopped weird pictures of her and a boyfriend, checked out her eBay purchase history, and eventually ended up with her father's phone number. I don't have any clue why I do these things. I think the taboo nature of teacher and student relations is extremely thrilling to me. We are the same age, by the way. Story 19. When I was about 20 and my now ex-girlfriend was 18, we went up to her parents' cabin. Her parents, she and I, decided to go for a ride around the lake in their canoe. Her dad was paddling by himself at the back. She and I were sitting in the middle, and her mom was at the front. It was a pretty standard small-size canoe. It was a bit cold, so my ex brought a blanket and draped it over herself. I got a cold, so she draped it over me too. Next thing you know, her hands start to wander under the blanket, and a few minutes later I was getting hand jays. Not stopping at this daring move, she takes it a step further and rests her head on my lap, above the blanket, beginning what I would soon find out was her pretty smooth transition. She says her face and ears are cold, so she puts her whole head under the blanket and starts to go to town with. All the while the blanket is pulled tightly over my neck down to my knees so as to hide the bobbing of her head. This goes on until I was done, and she casually takes it in and comes back up as if nothing ever occurred. To this day, I have no idea how I managed to carry on a conversation with her parents, nor do I have any idea what we were talking about. Story 20. My girlfriend and I at the time were attending a huge house party on the south shore of Montreal. The place was huge. When we arrived, there were already a ton of people, over 75 guests, I would say. The entrance to the party was on the side of the house, which led to the basement. There was a DJ and party equipment. It was a great party. All guests were told to remain in the basement and that the rest of the house was off limits. But as the night progressed and the number of guests increased, some people started going up to the gigantic kitchen where the music wasn't as loud. People could talk there, mix drinks, and meet other guests. My girlfriend got in the mood. Mind you, both of us were still living at our parents' back then, so we often ended up doing it in the back seat of my Chevy Nova. But when we got to my car, there were too many people around, walking by, puking in the parking, etc. We thought of driving a little further down the road for some privacy, but ended up deciding to go back inside instead. We were still very titillated, but we couldn't find enough privacy to get it on. She went to the restroom upstairs, because the line was too long at the one downstairs. At that point, there were well over 100 guests at the party. After about 20 minutes, I went up to find her. I looked for her for another 20 minutes before I found her near the kitchen, where most people who wanted to strike up a conversation were. She told me she got lost and met with the older sister of the guy who invited us. This was their parents' house. Our friend's sister told her that there was a guest room at the other end of the house that we could use if we wanted. My girlfriend dared me to find it with her so we could get it on. So we started walking down the hallways to find the said room, but we didn't dare to turn on any lights. We couldn't find the guest room. We did find a room with a huge door and very high ceilings. There were rows of benches that were very comfortable. I told my girlfriend I thought it was some kind of home theater room. She couldn't wait anymore. After closing the big door, we immediately started doing it. It was awesome. At the end, she couldn't find one of her shoes, so we started looking for a light switch. When I turned on the lights, my girlfriend screamed, and I started to laugh. This was not a home theater. It was a private chapel with a huge painting of Jesus on the cross in front of the rows of benches. There was a tall stained glass window on each side of the room and even a holy water basin near the entrance. We found the missing shoe, closed the light, and went back to the party. Didn't get caught, if you don't count Jesus. Story 21. When I was around 11, my family took a trip to the beach with friends and neighbors. We all have fun doing fun beach things on a fun beach day. After attempting to teach myself to surf all day and failing miserably at it, I was ready for a nap. We didn't get to go to the beach very often. The combination of having more sun, exercise, and near drownings than I'd ever had in my entire life in just one day plane tuckered me out. So, I crashed out on a towel, still wearing my day-glow orange and green Michelangelo Ray-Ban ripoffs. Well, I wasn't asleep long, if at all. Before the girls came walking back from their fun beach day. The girls were friends of my neighbor, whose parents had driven us all to the fun beach for fun. The girls were sisters, aged 15 and 18. Anyway, I was awake, but hadn't moved at all. They see me sleeping there. One says, "Aw, is he sleeping? How cute." And the other shushed her and said, He's out. Shush, don't wake him up. I was petrified. The hottest girl in a bikini I had ever been within 6 feet of said I was cute. I realized that my sunglasses were still on, and for some reason, at that point, I knew that if she knew that I knew that she said I was cute, the entire world would end. So I just stayed absolutely still, hoping with everything I had that they would just go away and I would be freed from this awkward moment my hormones had created for me. Of course not. No, they decide to lay out their towels directly in front of me, apparently to tan the insides of their legs. They both lay down, my line of sight now filled entirely with nothing but perfect, beautiful, amazing, wonderful cakes, camel toe, and everything else that was not but a myth to me before that point. These were the dark times, before the internet, so I was overcome with fear, joy, and excitement, all at the same time, but knew this moment was as rare as they come, so I stayed asleep. I stared and stared, trying to sear the picture into my memory. It was the closest I'd ever been to a girl half bare, and I could just look. I looked and looked, making sure not to move or make a single sound that would ruin this enchantment. Unfortunately, some movements are involuntary, and my dong decided that it was high time I learnt what it was like to be a man, and took the initiative to present itself to the ladies via the inevitable and hilariously obvious swimsuit Woody. Now my blissful reverence had turned back into mortal fear, as they still hadn't noticed. I shut my eyes as tightly as I could, and tried to think of something, anything, that could reverse the process. Baseball, the Pledge of Allegiance, building a birdhouse, nothing would work. I was about to try to make some sort of slick position shift, hoping maybe I could pin my package to the ground and it would give up, like a wrestler. Before I could make my move, I heard one of the girls giggle and whisper, "Oh my God, look!" My heart stopped beating. The older one just burst out laughing, which made the other one crack up, and it was just too much for my brain to handle. I panicked. I sat up and tried to cover my shame with the towel, but I was still sitting on most of it, so I ended up just pitching a more obvious tent in my lap while the girls laughed hysterically. I apologized and said I couldn't help it, which just made them laugh even more. Eventually, both the laughter and the Woody wound back down, and they both kind of comforted me and told me I shouldn't be embarrassed because they knew that it happens to boys all the time when they wake up, and it just meant I was going through puberty. All I could do was nod and hope my face wasn't as red as it felt. I made them promise not to tell anyone else, and the older of the two said, "Yeah, I think you're embarrassed enough already." I realized that on that fun day at the beach, I was not yet a man but would become a man one day. And also that sunglasses are the best way to stare at hot girls without being noticed, as long as you remember to think about baseball. Story 22. So technically we did get caught, but this is the story of the creepiest thing I've ever done. Summer break, after my freshman year of college, my friend and I were hanging out at his house. He'd been talking to this girl, and before they both went home for the summer, she invited him to her birthday party a few days later. Here's the catch though, he doesn't have her number, her address, her Facebook, or even her last name. Literally all the information we had was her first name, the date and time of the party, and the town that she grew up in. Using that, we managed to find her high school yearbook, and my friend remembers, she mentions she was in some intramural club, so we look her up, and we get a last name. From there we ran her last name through the yellow pages, and her family is listed, so we get an address. The next day we hopped in the car and made the drive from NY to CT. At first, she greets us all happily, but after a minute realization hits her and she says, "How did you know my address?" My friend and I looked at each other and chuckled. She didn't seem terribly creepy. We hung out a bit and played ultimate frisbee with her friends. Story 23. My girlfriend was showering, and I decided to try to sneak in. I don't know why, but it seemed like the funniest idea in the world at the time. I picked those dumb bathroom locks, got to the shower, opened the curtain, and climbed in. Well, there I was, directly behind her, and she still hadn't noticed. At this point, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. I wanted to retreat, but now I was too scared of getting caught to even move. She turned around, saw me, and started shrieking and shrieking like I've never heard before, and hope never to hear again. So yeah, I got caught in the end, but it was so much worse because I got caught much later than expected. Story 24. In high school, I was very active as a tech in my school's theater program. Occasionally, our theater would get rented by groups needing a venue to perform in, and our directors would let the techs operate the events. One yearly event we always looked forward to was the cheerleader and majorette recital, since we get to hang out with girls for several rehearsals and performances. In my senior year, I happened to inherit the keys, a set of keys passed down by the top tech each year that opened all the important doors in the theater. One door led to a narrow room with no ceiling, which was generally ignored until the recital came around that year. I managed to pawn off my job one night to an underclassman so I could wander around backstage and check out the girls. After a while of creeping, I entered the room with no ceiling, climbed up the walls Jackie Chan style, and made my way to the dressing room. It was really tricky crawling at the top of a brick wall and negotiating all the piping and cables in the way, though I managed to get to the girls' dressing room and bathroom. The dressing room didn't have any inconspicuous way to look into the room from above. The bathroom did, however. One of the PA speakers in the ceiling were mounted loosely and just happened to be within reach of the wall. I tilted it slightly, looked in, and was rewarded with the sight of dancers changing. Several short numbers were being performed, so girls were in and out of there a lot for costume changes, and I had a bird's-eye view of all of them. Before you ask, the thought of soloing one out did cross my mind. I was frigging ready. The problem was that keeping my balance at the top of the wall required full concentration. The last thing I needed as a senior ready to graduate was to fall through the ceiling with my dong in hand onto a naked dancer. Story 25. When I was in high school, my friends and I had this joke about soloing off in every room in the school without the actual intention of doing so. We just joked about it. One day, I was at a basketball game and some hot girl who was a grade higher than me started flirting with me, and I got all excited, and then she left, but she gave me her number. I had heard this girl was down to bang, so I couldn't stop thinking about doing it with her. Anyway, my biology teacher comes up to me and asks me to go to her classroom and see if she left her computer on, and if I did, to turn it off. She trusted me a lot, as did most other teachers. I was not a teacher's pet, but just that good old boy with excellent manners who could be trusted with their knowledge. So I went upstairs, and while I was there, I turned off her computer, and I was just so titillated that I immediately locked the door and started doing it right there, lying behind one of the lab tables. I knew there was no way anyone would catch me, but still, the thrill combined with that girl being so flirtatious made me so excited than I had ever been before. So, this became a thing for me. And because I had so many teacher supporters, I was able to do this in a couple more classrooms over the course of 3 months in a bulleted list. I eventually rationalized how weird it was and knocked that crap off, but for those 3 months I went ham on my dong, and it felt great. Story 26. In college, my friends and I used to go to his car in the parking lot to get stoned. In the same dorm as us, freshman year, were 2 very attractive twin ladies who drove this little purple Kia around campus. They were very easy to notice. One evening, on our way to my friend's car, we walked past the purple Kia and noticed that the window was rolled down a small bit. My friend reached his hand in and unlocked the passenger side door. Without much discussion, I, along with 3 other friends, hopped in the car and proceeded to smoke a giant blunt with the windows rolled up. After finishing, we exited the car rather quickly, making sure the doors were locked. There was still a ton of smoke trapped in the car. I am not really sure why we did it, but we never were caught or questioned. Story 27. When I was 18, my neighbors went out of town, and I had to let their dog out a few times a day and feed him. One time, I got nosy and snooped around the house, going through drawers, peeking at unmentionables, etc. I let the dog back in, then went home and realized I didn't have their keys anymore. The dilemma is they were coming back the next day. If I left the keys on the counter, no biggie. If I left them on their dresser in their bedroom, I'd have some explaining to do. So I called my friend over and we planned our first break and entering caper. We grabbed a steak knife and I boosted him onto the roof. He cut 2 small slits to be able to pop the pins on the screen. We were lucky that the window was unlocked. He put the screen back in and found the keys on the counter. Story 28. I broke up with my long-term girlfriend. I was really having a tough time, and we were separated by a very long distance. We talked a little bit, and that led me to want more communication. She plays World of Warcraft, a game I introduced her to, and while I quit, she kept playing. I found out what guild she was in, and then I began working my way into that guild under false pretenses. I didn't play World of Warcraft at the time, so I had to explain I was from another server and I just wanted to learn from them, since they were a high-ranking guild. I told the guildmaster I wanted to learn their elite raiding strategies, and after having a few emails with their GM, he said it would be fine for me to listen in, and I agreed not to talk, as I didn't want to disturb their raiding. So, heart beating fast, I logged into their vent server at 2 a.m. for the next week to listen to their 4-hour raids. What an adrenaline rush. It was funny because people were like, "Who's the creeper listening to us raid? Why won't he talk?" etc. It made me chuckle inside, and the raid leader defended me. If they only knew my real reason. I heard her voice again, and it was like I was awake again. I was so happy. Then came the intimate talk about her new boyfriend, and I was crushed. I got more than I bargained for. It sucked, hearing about what they did in bed. I did this for about a week until I couldn't take hearing it anymore, and I stopped listening to raids. I was really hurting inside. After taking a good look in the mirror, I realized I had just taken a really dangerous step as a stalker, and I didn't want to be that guy. I don't talk to her anymore. The funny thing is, it was so easy. The information was all online, and a few simple free accounts gave me access to their forums and raid times. Be careful out there. You shouldn't be this attached to anyone. Someone who needs to be constantly attached to another, or in need of constant attention, has serious issues they should work out. It was only after the fact that I realized that the person I was listening to could not be happy with herself. If you combine that with no self-reflection, she is likely to seek attention for the rest of her days, wondering where she went wrong as age creeps in and steals what she values most. Looking at it now, I kind of dodged a bullet. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.